Breaking intro. Esther Lungu in danger? The morning sun cast long shadows across Lusaka as news broke that would shake the very foundations of Zambian politics. Esther Lungu, the former First Lady of Zambia and wife of ex-President Edgar Lungu, found herself at the center of a brewing international storm that threatened to tear apart diplomatic relations between three nations. The whispers in the corridors of power had grown to thunderous roars, and what began as routine political transitions had evolved into something far more sinister and complex. Picture this: a woman who once walked the halls of State House with dignity and grace, now potentially facing dangers that extend far beyond the borders of her homeland. The very mention of her name in diplomatic circles sends ripples of tension through conference rooms in Pretoria, London, and Washington, D.C. But what exactly has placed Esther Lungu in such a precarious position, and why are international powers suddenly so interested in the fate of Zambia's former First Lady? The danger surrounding Esther Lungu isn't just political rhetoric or media sensationalism. Intelligence sources suggest a web of accusations, international pressure, and behind-the-scenes negotiations that could determine not only her personal fate but the future trajectory of Zambian democracy. From allegations of corruption to claims of political persecution, the situation has escalated to levels that few could have predicted when Edgar Lungu peacefully handed over power to President Hakainde Hichilema. The complexity of her situation becomes even more apparent when we consider the multiple layers of jeopardy she potentially faces. Domestically, there are ongoing investigations into various alleged financial improprieties during her husband's tenure. Internationally, there are suggestions that certain foreign powers may be using her case as leverage in broader geopolitical negotiations. The convergence of these factors has created a perfect storm where Esther Lungu's personal safety and freedom hang in the balance. What makes this situation particularly gripping is the human element at its core. Beyond the political machinations and international intrigue lies a woman who has been thrust into circumstances that threaten to consume not just her, but potentially destabilize regional relationships that have taken decades to build. The question isn't just whether Esther Lungu is in danger. It's about understanding the nature of that danger and the far-reaching implications of how it's resolved. The stakes couldn't be higher. In a region where political transitions have historically been marred by violence and instability, Zambia had been held up as a beacon of democratic progress. The peaceful transfer of power from Edgar Lungu to Hakainde Hichilema was celebrated internationally as evidence that African democracy could mature beyond the cycle of coups and contested elections. Now, the treatment of the former president's wife has become a test case for whether that democratic maturity can withstand the pressures of accountability and justice. As we delve deeper into this unfolding drama, we'll discover that the danger surrounding Esther Lungu is multifaceted and extends far beyond what meets the eye. It involves economic interests worth billions of dollars, diplomatic relationships that shape continental policy, and personal vendettas that have been years in the making. The story of her current predicament is simultaneously a tale of individual vulnerability and a broader narrative about power, accountability, and the price of political leadership in modern Africa. The story begins in 2020, during height of Edgar Lungu's presidency, when South African Revenue Service investigators noticed unusual patterns in property transactions and business investments flowing from Zambian sources. The amounts were significant, individual transactions worth tens of millions of rand, but it wasn't just size that raised red flags. It was speed of transactions, complexity of corporate structures involved, and apparent disconnect between declared sources of funds and actual amounts being invested. Initial investigations revealed that members of the Lungu family had acquired at least 17 high-value properties across South Africa's major cities within a 2-year period. These weren't modest investments by wealthy politicians. These were luxury estates, commercial properties, and investment portfolios worth hundreds of millions of rand. Properties were purchased through web of shell companies and trust structures so complex that it took forensic accountants months to trace actual beneficial ownership. But property acquisitions were just the beginning. Deeper investigation revealed that Lungu family's South African investments extended far beyond real estate into mining ventures, import-export businesses, and financial services companies. Esther Lungu, in particular, had emerged as major player in cross-border trade, with business interests spanning from copper exports to luxury goods importation. Her companies secured lucrative contracts and concessions that materialized with remarkable ease and speed. The turning point in South African attitudes came when investigators discovered several of these business deals involved South African companies and officials in ways that potentially violated both countries' laws. Mining concessions in Zambia had been awarded to South African companies with unusual speed and favorable terms, while simultaneously, Zambian investors were receiving preferential treatment in South African business environments. The pattern suggested systematic exchange of favors operating outside normal governmental and commercial channels. Intelligence sources within South African government described the moment when full scope became clear. It was during routine briefing on cross-border financial crime when an analyst presented a chart showing connections between various Lungu family business interests and South African entities. The web of relationships was so extensive and profitable that it had created what analysts called a parallel diplomatic relationship operating independently of official government-to-government channels. The discovery that shocked South African officials most was not extent of business relationships, but methods used to facilitate and conceal them. Sophisticated financial engineering had been employed to create investment structures that were technically legal but ethically questionable. Funds appearing to originate from legitimate Zambian business activities were later traced to sources that raised serious questions about their actual origin and processes used to generate them. Esther Lungu's specific role became particular focus of South African investigators. Unlike her husband, who as president enjoyed certain diplomatic immunities, Esther had been operating as private businesswoman whose activities fell under full scrutiny of commercial and financial regulations. Her business ventures, initially seen as entrepreneurial spirit, were now re-examined through lens of potential money laundering and corruption. The secret deportation plan revealed, which involved plans for what intelligence sources describe as assisted departure. This phase would have been implemented if voluntary return proved unsuccessful and would have involved coordination with Zambian authorities to physically escort Esther Lungu back to Zambia. While officials would later claim such departure was voluntary, the circumstances would have made any real choice impossible. The revelation of this plan allegedly came through an intelligence leak within the South African security services, where some officials reportedly had concerns about the legality and ethics of the proposed actions. The leak suggested that not all South African security personnel were comfortable with the plan, particularly given questions about whether proper legal procedures were being followed and whether Esther Lungu's human rights were being adequately protected. International law experts who have reviewed the alleged plan documents express serious concerns about several aspects of the proposed operations. Forced deportation of individuals who have not been formally charged with crimes in either their host or home countries raises significant human rights issues. The plan's alleged reliance on making life uncomfortable for the target individual could constitute harassment and might violate international treaties on the treatment of refugees and asylum seekers. The timing of the plan's alleged development coincides with increased pressure from the Zambian government for South African cooperation in corruption investigations. President Hichilema's administration had reportedly become frustrated with what they perceived as South African reluctance to fully cooperate with their requests for mutual legal assistance. The deportation plan may have represented South Africa's attempt to resolve these diplomatic tensions while avoiding the more complex legal processes involved in formal extradition proceedings. American and British intelligence services were reportedly aware of the deportation plan's development, though their exact level of involvement remains unclear. Some sources suggest that these international partners may have provided intelligence support or even encouraged the plan's implementation as part of broader anti-corruption efforts in the region. However, official spokespeople from both countries have denied any involvement in planning or supporting forced deportation efforts. Zambia's hidden role in the negotiations. While public attention has focused on South Africa's apparent change of heart regarding the Lungu family, Zambia's own role in the unfolding drama has been far more complex and controversial than official statements suggest. Behind the scenes, the Hichilema administration has been engaged in sophisticated diplomatic maneuvering that reveals both the lengths to which the new government will go to pursue accountability and the delicate balance they must maintain between justice and regional stability. The story of Zambia's hidden role begins in the immediate aftermath of President Hichilema's electoral victory in August 2021. While public rhetoric emphasized reconciliation and national unity, private communications between senior government officials revealed a much more aggressive approach toward investigating the previous administration. Intelligence sources suggest that within weeks of taking office, Hichilema's team had already begun developing comprehensive strategies for pursuing corruption cases that extended beyond Zambian borders. Central to Zambia's strategy was the recognition that many of the most significant financial irregularities during the Lungu administration involved cross-border transactions and assets held in neighboring countries, particularly South Africa. This realization led to the establishment of what sources describe as a special recovery unit within the Ministry of Justice, tasked specifically with identifying and repatriating assets allegedly stolen from the Zambian people during the previous administration. The special recovery unit's work revealed the extent to which members of the Lungu family had integrated their business interests across southern African borders. Esther Lungu, in particular, appeared to have been involved in complex financial arrangements that spanned multiple jurisdictions and involved sophisticated offshore structures designed to obscure the true source and ownership of significant assets. The complexity of these arrangements required equally sophisticated investigative and legal strategies. Zambia's approach to negotiations with South Africa was reportedly influenced by intelligence sharing with international partners, particularly the United States and United Kingdom. These countries had their own interests in cleaning up corruption in the region and were willing to provide technical assistance and intelligence support to help the Hichilema administration build strong cases against former officials. This international backing gave Zambia significant leverage in discussions with South African authorities. However, Zambia's negotiating position was complicated by the need to maintain regional relationships and avoid actions that might destabilize the broader Southern African political environment. Edgar Lungu, despite no longer holding office, remained a significant figure in Zambian politics with substantial support among certain constituencies. Actions against his wife needed to be carefully calibrated to avoid triggering domestic political backlash or creating martyrs for opposition movements. International pressure, US, UK, and Pretoria's agenda. The involvement of major international powers in what might otherwise be considered a regional African political dispute reveals the global significance of anti-corruption efforts and the strategic importance of Southern Africa in broader geopolitical calculations. The United States, United Kingdom, and other international partners have not been passive observers in the Esther Lungu situation, but rather active participants whose own agendas and interests have shaped the trajectory of events in ways that are only now becoming apparent. The United States' interest in the Lungu family case extends far beyond concerns about good governance in Zambia. American intelligence agencies have been tracking financial flows in Southern Africa as part of broader efforts to combat money laundering and terrorist financing networks that span multiple continents. The sophisticated financial structures allegedly used by members of the Lungu family fit patterns that American investigators have identified as potential vehicles for illicit financial flows that could ultimately impact American interests. Under the framework of various international anti-corruption initiatives, including the Kleptocracy Asset Recovery Initiative launched during the Obama administration and expanded under subsequent presidents, the United States has developed significant capabilities for tracking and recovering assets stolen by foreign officials. The Lungu family's alleged activities provided an opportunity for American authorities to test and refine these capabilities while simultaneously supporting broader policy objectives in Africa. The strategic importance of Zambia in American policy calculations cannot be understated. As Africa's second-largest copper producer and a key player in the global supply chain for critical minerals essential to renewable energy technologies, Zambia occupies a crucial position in American efforts to secure supply chains for the energy transition. Ensuring that Zambian governance meets international standards is therefore not just about fighting corruption, but about protecting strategic economic interests. American involvement in the Lungu family situation has reportedly included sharing financial intelligence with both Zambian and South African authorities, providing technical assistance for asset tracking and recovery efforts, and coordinating diplomatic pressure through multiple channels. The extent of this involvement suggests that the case has been elevated to senior levels within the American government and is being treated as a priority issue rather than a routine corruption matter. The United Kingdom's involvement reflects both historical connections to Southern Africa and contemporary strategic interests in the region. As a former colonial power with deep economic and cultural ties to both Zambia and South Africa, Britain has unique insights into regional political dynamics and extensive intelligence networks that can be leveraged to support anti-corruption efforts. The City of London's role as a global financial center also means that British authorities often have access to information about international financial transactions that may not be available to other countries. British involvement has reportedly focused particularly on the financial intelligence aspects of the case. Given London's expertise in tracking complex international financial structures, British authorities have been working with partners in both Zambia and South Africa to map the full extent of financial networks allegedly associated with the Lungu family, using sophisticated analytical tools to identify patterns and connections that might not be apparent from individual country investigations. The European Union's broader interests in promoting good governance in Africa have also played a role in shaping international responses to the Lungu family situation. EU development assistance to Zambia and South Africa is conditioned on maintaining acceptable standards of governance and rule of law, creating additional incentives for both countries to demonstrate their commitment to fighting corruption. The Lungu family case has become a test of whether regional governments are serious about meeting these international expectations. Esther Lungu's next move: exile or return. Standing at one of the most critical junctures in her life, Esther Lungu faces a decision that will define not only her personal future, but potentially influence the trajectory of political accountability in Southern Africa. The choice between exile and return represents far more than a simple geographic decision. It embodies fundamental questions about justice, dignity, and the price of political power in contemporary Africa. Each option carries profound implications that extend far beyond her individual circumstances. The option of exile, while offering immediate safety from potential prosecution, would require Esther Lungu to abandon virtually everything that has defined her adult life. The comfortable world of State House dinners, international diplomatic receptions, and the respect accorded to a former First Lady would be replaced by the uncertain existence of a political refugee, constantly looking over her shoulder and dependent on the hospitality of foreign governments that might withdraw their protection at any moment. Choosing exile would also carry enormous emotional and psychological costs. Being separated from family members, friends, and the familiar cultural environment of Zambia would create a form of internal displacement that money cannot compensate for. The luxury properties and business investments that once represented security and success would become reminders of a life that can never be fully reclaimed, assets that exist but cannot be freely enjoyed without the constant fear of legal complications. From a practical standpoint, sustainable exile would require finding a country willing to provide long-term sanctuary despite international pressure for her return. The list of potential destinations has been steadily shrinking as international anti-corruption networks have have expanded their reach and influence. Countries that might once have provided safe haven for wealthy African political figures now face their own pressures from international partners and domestic constituencies who are increasingly intolerant of harboring allegedly corrupt foreign officials. The financial implications of permanent exile are also staggering. Legal fees for fighting extradition requests and asset seizure orders could quickly consume resources that once seemed unlimited. The cost of maintaining security, legal representation, and a lifestyle appropriate for someone of her former status could prove unsustainable over extended periods, particularly if asset freezes and recovery efforts succeed in limiting access to funds. Perhaps most painfully, exile would mean accepting a form of guilt by association, regardless of the actual merits of any charges that might be brought against her. The international community and Zambian public would likely interpret flight as an admission of wrongdoing, making it virtually impossible to ever clear her name or restore her reputation. The legacy she leaves for her children and grandchildren would be forever tainted by the circumstances of her departure from Zambia. The alternative option of voluntary return to Zambia offers the possibility of confronting accusations directly and potentially clearing her name through the legal system. This choice would demonstrate confidence in her innocence and respect for the rule of law, potentially earning her some measure of public sympathy and legal credibility. Facing charges head-on, if they are ever formally brought, might be the only way to achieve genuine resolution of the cloud of suspicion that currently surrounds her. However, returning to Zambia would require enormous courage given the current political climate and the obvious enthusiasm of the Hichilema administration for pursuing corruption cases against former officials. The Zambian legal system, while generally fair, operates within a political environment where public opinion has been heavily influenced by campaigns against corruption during the previous administration. Finding truly impartial judges and juries might prove difficult given the high-profile nature of any case involving the former First Lady. The conditions under which Esther Lungu might return to Zambia would likely be subject to extensive negotiation between her legal representatives and government officials. These negotiations might include agreements about bail conditions, asset preservation, and even plea arrangements that could limit potential penalties in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations. The complexity of such arrangements suggests that any decision to return would require months of careful legal and strategic preparation. What this means for Zambia's future. The resolution of the Esther Lungu situation will reverberate through Zambian society and politics for generations to come, establishing precedents and norms that will shape how the country handles political transitions, corruption allegations, and the accountability of former leaders. The implications extend far beyond the fate of one individual to fundamental questions about the nature of Zambian democracy, the rule of law, and the country's relationships with regional and international partners. For Zambia's emerging democratic institutions, the handling of the Lungu family cases represents a crucial test of institutional strength and independence. If the legal system can successfully prosecute high-profile corruption cases fairly and transparently, it will demonstrate that no one is above the law and that democratic accountability can function effectively. This would strengthen public confidence in democratic institutions and potentially deter future corruption by political officials who would understand that they too could face consequences for their actions. However, if the legal proceedings are perceived as politically motivated persecution rather than genuine pursuit of justice, they could undermine public faith in the neutrality of democratic institutions. The challenge for President Hichilema's administration is to ensure that any legal actions against former officials are clearly based on evidence and proper legal procedures rather than political revenge. The perception of fairness will be as important as actual fairness in determining the long-term impact on Zambian democracy. The economic implications of the Esther Lungu case and broader anti-corruption efforts are potentially enormous for Zambia's development prospects. If successful asset recovery efforts can repatriate significant resources to the Zambian treasury, these funds could be directed toward development projects and social services that benefit ordinary citizens. The symbolic value of recovering stolen assets would demonstrate that corruption has real consequences and that resources belong to the people rather than individual officials. International confidence in Zambia's governance standards will be significantly influenced by how the Lungu family cases are resolved. Foreign investors, development partners, and international financial institutions are all watching carefully to see whether Zambia can demonstrate genuine commitment to fighting corruption and maintaining rule of law standards. Success in these high-profile cases could unlock additional international assistance and investment, while failure might limit access to international support and financing. The regional implications of Zambia's approach to the Lungu family situation are equally significant. Other southern African countries are watching to see whether aggressive anti-corruption efforts will become the new norm in post-election transitions. If Zambia's approach proves successful in promoting accountability without triggering political instability, it could become a model for other countries facing similar challenges with corrupt former officials.